In Shintoism, when people die, they become spirits of a different nature to living people. In other words, they become gods. My 6 uncles, or my father's 6 elder brothers, had fought for the Japanese army during World War II. Uncle Tadao, now in his mid-80s, was a former kamikaze pilot trainee for the Japanese Imperial Navy. And he had been training at Kanoya Navy Base in present-day Kyushu. I believe that it is a universal right for every single individual on this planet to be given the right to respect, honor, and commemorate those people who fought and died in the service of its country. And of course, Japan is no exception. Over 300,000 former American soldiers are buried in Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C., the United States of America. And just because the Confederate soldiers are buried there, it does not mean that the Arlington Cemetery endorses slavery. If you have common sense, it's easy to comprehend. And that is why the US presidents, such as Mr. Barack Obama and the husband of Mrs. Hillary Clinton, often pays visit to mourn the war dead. I totally support that. And here, where I am standing right now, the Yasukuni Shrine is simply no different from Arlington National Cemetery in the United States. Yasukuni does not endorse militarism, nor does it aim to glorify Japan's militaristic past. But instead, Yasukuni prays for world peace, just like my hero, Mr. Michael Jackson, heal the world. If you don't believe me, just please visit Yasukuni tomorrow on your LCC, low-cost carrier, and visit Tokyo and see it with your own eyes. As the Romans used to say, seeing is believing. So now, ladies and gentlemen, this shrine is of profound significance to we, the Japanese, since it enshrines over 2.46 million souls of the samurais who fought and died for their beloved nation. And I believe that every single Japanese, from homeless to the Prime Minister, should be given the right to visit here whenever they want to commemorate those who sacrificed themselves for their country. And it is not only me that is saying it. I share my views with the profound American professor of Georgetown University in the United States, Professor Kevin Doak. He's also supported Japanese prime ministers making frequent visits to the Yasukuni, because mourning the war dead and commemorating their souls, it's a matter of your divine heart. It is an act, something sacred that should not be treated for political purposes. Professor Kevin Doak of Georgetown University, he's also shown support for the late Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi when he visited Yasukuni quite often to commemorate those who sacrificed themselves. I totally agree with the Professor Kevin Doak. Yasukuni Shrine was established in 1869 to honor those who fought and died in Boshin War, 1868 to 69. Or it was a civil war that led to the modernization of Japan, the Meiji Restoration. And since then, the souls of the samurais who devoted their lives for the country in the Sino-Japanese War, 1894, and Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, and also, of course, World War II, are enshrined here. And that is why every day you see the Japanese citizens visiting here to honor those who sacrificed themselves for their beloved nation. Please don't take me wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Quite a few Western journalists are ignorant of the fact, the true facts about this shrine. Most journalists write articles before even visiting this place, and they think that there are tombstones or cremated ashes here, but it doesn't exist, because this place, Yasukuni, is not a cemetery. It is a shrine. And as I've told you before, in Shintoism, when people die, they become spirits of a different nature to living people. The Western journalists or the Western corporate media, they just stress their views and just insist their self-righteousness to create this image that Yasukuni Shrine is nothing but a militaristic war museum to glorify Japan's wartime past. But that is absolutely ridiculous and reprehensible. I do not accept that. And furthermore, let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, here on YouTube, that it is only China and South Korea that are abnormally obsessed with this Yasukuni Shrine issue. The former Japanese colony of Taiwan, they have never complained about Japanese prime ministers visiting here to pay respect to the soul of the samurais who sacrificed themselves for the nation. Neither the Indonesians, Vietnamese, the Burmese, the Myanmar, no other nations besides China and South Korea ever claim the Japanese prime ministers visiting here to commemorate the war there. Does have Aung San Suu Kyi of Myanmar or the Myanmar leaders, President Thein Sein, have they ever made an objection to the Prime Minister of Japan visiting here? Absolutely not. And indeed, the Japanese fought the British in World War II. And as a consequence, Japanese kicked out the British, for example, from Singapore, Hong Kong, and Burma, present-day Myanmar. But do any of those countries ever claim or making complaint against Japanese Prime Minister making official visits to Yasukuni Shrine? Absolutely not, ladies and gentlemen. It is only South Korea and China that are claiming or trying to stir up their own nationalism every year. And why? Let me answer why. The answer is simple. It is because Beijing and Seoul uses this Yasukuni Shrine issue as a stick or an Indiana Jones whip to bully Japan to meet their domestic ends. Let me make one point crystal clear, ladies and gentlemen, and that is that China is truly a master of exaggerating the extent of their suffering during World War II. Do you know the great Hollywood movie Last Emperor, starring John Long? He's a nice guy. Well, he looks like a nice guy. Well, in 1912, when Fu Gi became the last emperor of China, China entered a civil war in 1912, and it lasted until 1949. China is a master of exaggerating their extent of suffering. And after Japan was defeated by America in 1945, Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalists, and the communists, Mao Zedong, they started fighting against each other once again. Bloodshed. And who won? Of course, the communist China. Chiang Kai-shek was kicked out to Taiwan. And in 1949, communist China was established. So when China pretends that they are a severe victim of the war against Japan during World War II, it is overly exaggerated. Please don't be fooled by Beijing, ladies and gentlemen. You know the cyber threat by the Chinese recently. What they say and what they do, it never makes sense. Calling that invasion of Tibet in 1950 a liberation. But now, let me go back to the topic of Yasukuni. I pay visit here about once a month. I jog around here, the Imperial Palace, to burn my fat. So Yasukuni is a place where a typical Japanese citizen like myself visits here, during a dog walk. Well, I don't think dogs can come in here, but it is no place to bully or stir things up. The souls of the samurais who dedicated their lives for their beloved nation rests here. We have to rest them in peace. That is why Professor Kevin Doak has also mentioned, he's an American citizen, that we should not deal with Yasukuni as a political agenda. I totally agree, ladies and gentlemen. And when I say something like this on YouTube, I've been cyberbullied 1,000 times by the Korean Americans or Korean Chinese around the world, or Europeans, you name it. But we live in a free world of democracy and free speech. So let me say this crystal clear. When I say something like this, people call me a nationalist or right-wing moron or whatever you name it. But I am not. I'm just a believer in democracy and free speech, just like you are. But when I say something like this, when I challenge the status quo, in which what I am trying to do right now, ladies and gentlemen, the Western journalists would often come up to me and say, excuse me, the war criminals are buried here. What are you going to do about that? Well, then let me ask you a question. Who are these war criminals? Well, besides, they are not buried here. They are enshrined here. A mistake often made by Western journalists, okay? They have to study war. But let me ask you a question, ladies and gentlemen. Who are the so-called 14 war criminals that are enshrined here? Let me call them Ocean's 14 to make a little difference, to make it, to distinguish from the status quo. I don't call them war criminals. I call them Ocean's 14. The Ocean's 14, you call them war criminals. They were the people who were chosen, they were tried, and they were convicted by a law which did not exist when Japan surrendered on the 15th of August 1945. What I'm telling you is that these 14, Ocean's 14, were people who were tried by a law which did not exist. They were tried under ex post facto law. And when I say this, I mean the so-called crime against peace and crime against humanity. These two laws did not exist under the international law when Japan lost the war. It was invented or created by the white victors, the Americans or the British, in order to hang the former Japanese military leaders. There's no doubt about that. And it is not only me that's saying that. I share my view with a prominent professor in Georgetown University, Professor Kevin Doak. Let me introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, a quote from Professor Doak. He's mentioned as follows, quote, "The validity of the Tokyo trial from 1946 to 48 is highly questionable from a legal perspective, regarding that they were judged by ex post facto law. And it is no surprise that some Japanese oppose the verdict, although it does not necessarily mean they justify the war. Period. We have to think with our own minds. Now in the 21st century, look back into history. Don't take me wrong. I'm not trying to justify Japan's militarism during World War II. I think that goes the same with Professor Kevin Doe. All we are searching for is the justice and the truth of history here. That this is a challenge towards history. And before I conclude this speech, I would like to point out one significant point regarding the Yasukuni issue. The so-called the war criminals, the 14 war criminals, I call them Ocean's 14, I told you. They were enshrining Yasukuni in the fall of 1978. Then Prime Minister Suzuki Zenko, or Zenko Suzuki, he visited Yasukuni 8 times after that for the next 3 years. Did China complain? Never. Not a single word from 1978 to 1981. And when China doesn't complain, neither does South Korea. They always copy what Beijing does. Now, after 1981, in 1982, Yasuhiro Nakasone, he took office. A good old friend of Mr. Ronald Reagan, the cool guy, the macho man, and Maggie Thatcher. She was a brave woman also. Now, after Nakasone took office in 1982, did China complain? No. 1983, no. 1984, no. What? That's right. It was not until the 15th of August, 1985, that the communist Beijing suddenly they raised their hand saying, "Excuse me, I am not going to allow you visit Yasukuni. Are you glorifying Japan's militaristic past?" Please think for a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Why did China suddenly raise their hand? The reason is crystal clear: to gain political advantage over Japan, over territorial issues and so on, including the present-day Senkaku Islands today, and also in the southern China Sea, the Vietnamese and the Filipinos. They are suffering with Chinese invasion. China's intention is to make Senkaku or the Spratlys or the Parcel Islands into the third Tibet. We, the people of the democratic world, we cannot allow that. So, ladies and gentlemen, please think for a moment. You people call it 14 war criminals. They were enshrined here in 1978 in the fall. For the next 6 years, China nor South Korea, they never made a single objection whatsoever. Of course, I mean, from my point of view, it is natural to respect, honor, and commemorate those who fought and died in the service of its nation. Don't you think so? We should not make this a political agenda, ladies and gentlemen. Yasukuni Shrine is a place where the souls of the true samurais sleeps. We have to keep this place quiet, just like the Arlington National Cemetery in the United States. All I'm asking for is a new perspective, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not trying to rewrite history. That's ridiculous. We live in a free democratic world here. But I would like to challenge the status quo. Please don't put polonium into my sushi, ladies and gentlemen, if you see me in the streets of Tokyo. And if you are still doubtful about what I've told you, please visit Tokyo tomorrow. I'll be happy to be your guide if I have time. So please send me an email if you want me to be your humble guide. Omotenashi no kokoro, the heart of humble service. That is what Shintoism is all about. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you in Tokyo before the Tokyo Olympics 2020. Well, hopefully. Thank you very much. ありがとうございました。